Hey everyone, it's Mostly Casual Commander. I'm BK. Check the description for some sweet links. This is a Modern Horizons 3 game, and Kyle's first up with Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student, who flips over to Tamiyo, Seasoned Scholar, so long as he draws enough cards, and that's what he's gonna do. I'm playing Satya, Aetherflux Genius. I'm gonna make energy and copy tokens all day long. Next up is Scott playing Disa the Restless. He'll try to fill up his bin super fast to take advantage of his commander's ability. And we have J-Man playing Omo, Queen of Vesuva. With the help of Omo's everything counters, he can get off-tribe creatures to work together. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and stick around for an appearance from my fat cat Meatball. He's so chunky. Kyle started us off by playing a Misty Rainforest, immediately cracking that to bring out a Breeding Pool untapped at the cost of 2 life, in order to cast his commander, Tamiyo, as well as playing a free Lotus Petal. He's off to the races on turn 1. He passed the turn over to me. I play Storm Carved Coast as my land for turn before passing to Scott. He played an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, as his land before passing over to J-Man. He draws and plays a command tower into a Soul Ring. At least half of us had a decent turn 1. He passes the turn back over to Kyle. He draws, and as his first action, he'll attack his commander into J-Man for 0 points of damage. But he's not worried about that. He cares about Tamiyo's triggered ability. On the attack, he gets to make a clue token. And then he uses his Lotus Petal and his land to cast See Beyond. So See Beyond will have him draw 2 cards and then shuffle 1 away into his library, but more importantly, it triggers his commander. This will have Tamiyo flip over into Tamiyo's Seasoned Scholar, so she can shrink an attacking creature, return an instant or sorcery, as well as draw him half of his library. And that's the most important takeaway here. So Kyle immediately activates her, ticking her up, and plays an island as his land before passing over to me. On my turn, I play an island, and then I cast a Solar Transformer. It's a mono rock that can give me some energy, so I gain 3 energy counters, and I pass the turn over to Scott. He draws, and then he plays a forest as his land for turn, and he immediately uses that in order to cast Mesmeric Orb, having everybody start milling cards whenever they untap permanents. So he then passes the turn over to J-Man, who has to mill 1 card before drawing his card for turn, thanks to his tapped command tower. He then plays Talon Gates of Madara. When that ETBs, he has the option of phasing something out. With no good targets, he just casts his commander, Omo, Queen of Vesuva. Her ETB will have an everything counter go on his command tower as well as Omo. He then passes the turn to Kyle. He'll untap and mill a forest. He then plays a forest as his land before casting Joel Rael, Mundwali Recluse. He could potentially make some cats and pump the team quite a bit. He passes the turn over to me. I have to mill 3 cards thanks to Mesmeric Orb. I'll draw for turn and then play a Plains as my land. Afterwards, I cast Reckless Fireweaver. I've got a lot of artifacts in my deck, so I want to start burning down my opponents. I play Talisman of Creativity, which triggers my Reckless Fireweaver, pinging each of my opponents for 1. I then pass, and on Scott's turn, he has to mill a couple, then draws. He sadly missed a land drop, but he gets to play Grapple with the Past. So he'll mill 3 cards and then return a land card, in this case, back to his hand. And in this case, he brings a Luxury Suite to his hand. Then he'll go ahead and play that as his land for turn as well. However, he has nothing left to do for this turn, so he passes it over to J-Man. And once again, Mesmeric Orb does Mesmeric Orb things. J-Man has to mill a little bit before drawing. He plays a Rampant Frogantua. Names are hard. He then moves into combat with Omo at Scott. This will trigger Omo on the attack, so he'll dish out an everything counter onto his Frogantua and his gate. Onto Kyle's turn, he'll have to mill thanks to Orb. Then he'll uptick his commander, bringing her to 8 whole loyalty points. He casts Forget. He targets himself, so he'll discard 2 cards and then gets to draw 2 cards. This will also trigger Joel Rael, making him a 2/2 cat token, which he draws perfectly, using our dry erase tokens. Thanks, Scott. He then drops in Otawara, Soaring City, as his land, before casting Sylvan Library, increasing the amount of cards he could draw on his turn at the expense of some life. He passes the turn over to me, and of course I have to mill as well. I haven't been afraid of tapping my permanents, but it's starting to add up. I cast my commander, Satya, Aetherflux Genius. And he says haste, so I'm going to go ahead and use him right now by moving into combat, swinging not only my commander but also my Reckless Fireweaver at Scott. On the attack, I make a copy of my Reckless Fireweaver, gain 2 energy, and the copy token is tapped and attacking Scott as well, dropping him to 33. Then on my end step, my commander says, hey, pay 2 energy to keep that Fireweaver out. So I do. On to Scott's turn. He has to mill a couple cards. Of note, one of them's a fancy Life from the Loam, so he's got some dredge potential. Then he casts Polygoyf. This thing cares about card types in all the bins and has Trample and Myriad. That's pretty good. He then passes the turn over to J-Man, who has to mill a bunch of cards before drawing his card for his turn. Then he plays Wonderscape Sage. So this thing wants him to bounce non-basic lands to draw a card and keep it. J-Man then moves into combat, swinging his 3/3 at Tamiyo, which gets shrunk, and Kyle puts a cat in front of it, absorbing the rest of the damage. I would have preferred to attack Tamiyo on my turn, but I had no good attacks, so I had to go with Scott. On to Kyle's turn. He draws, and Sylvan Library says draw 2 more, and you can pay life. In this case, he doesn't. But he still drew them, so Joel Rael triggers, getting him another cat. He then downticks Tamiyo. He gets Tamiyo's emblem, giving him no maximum hand size, and her ability had him draw a whopping 33 cards. From among them, he found a Propaganda. Now that he has a giant target painted on him, he figured he'd play it. Then he casts Emrakul's Messenger. He'll start making Eldrazi spawn with his second card drawn each turn. Onto my turn. Of course, Mesmeric Orb has me mill a bunch. I draw a much needed land. An Ardarkar Wastes. Adakar. Aardvark. After that, I once again pick on Scott. It's not that he deserves it, but attacking him with my commander means my commander gets to live. On the attack, I select a non-creature token, make 2 energy, and then I get a whole nother Reckless Fireweaver. In second main, I play Talisman of Progress, triggering all 3 of my Reckless Fireweavers, effectively bolting each one of my opponents when I play an artifact. And I play another artifact. A Razorfield Ripper has me deal 3 more points of damage. I'm feeling decent about my situation and hope I could keep up the momentum. On my end step, I once again pay 2 energy to keep my Reckless Fireweaver token around. On Scott's turn, he has to mill a bunch, and then he dredges out his Life from the Loam, so he'll mill 3 more cards and put life into his hand. He then casts Life from the Loam, so he'll return 3 land cards from his graveyard to his hand. Then he'll play 1 for turn in the form of an Overgrown Tomb. He'll shock that in, losing 2 points of life. Afterwards, he plays a Shenanigans. He targets my Razorfield Ripper because he doesn't want me to start making copy tokens of that, triggering all of my Fireweavers. And let's be real, I was gonna. Scothamus Maximus then passes the turn, and J-Man mills before drawing. He plays a Forest as his land for turn. He doesn't appreciate his current options, so he activates his Sage, bouncing his Gate back to his hand, drawing a card, and then he plays a Poison Dart Frog, and he's a very distinguished gentleman. It's a 1/1 with reach, but he could give it Death Touch, so watch out. He then passes the turn over to Kyle, who has to mill a bunch. Then Sylvan Library allows him to draw 3. He puts 2 back on top, but he does get to make a cat token, as well as an Eldrazi spawn in the process. Afterwards, he plays Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, as his land for turn. He upticks his Tamiyo, shrinking any attackers, but just a little. Then he casts a Flux Channeler. Not appreciating his Proliferate ability, J-Man decides to make use of a counterspell he's been holding on to, Strix Serenade. So he'll counter that spell, and Kyle will get a 2/2 bird instead. He then sacks his Eldrazi spawn, using the mana for On the Trail. So once again, when he draws his second card each turn, now he can start dropping lands that are tapped. Onto my turn, I have to mill a bunch of cards, and when I draw for turn, I find a Filigree Racer. When that ETBs, not only do I gain 4 energy from it, but it also triggers all 3 of my Reckless Fireweavers, bolting each one of my opponents once again. After that, I crew the Filigree Racer with one of my Fireweavers, and then I move into combat, once again picking on Scott with my commander. With my commander's ability, I make a copy token of my now creature type Filigree Racer. I'll have that enter attacked and attacking J-Man. When it ETBs, it triggers my 3 Reckless Fireweavers, pinging my opponents once again. J-Man takes his beats as opposed to putting a chump blocker in the way of it, and then I move into my end step, paying 4 energy for my new Racer. On Scott's turn, he has to mill a bunch of cards himself. He then dredges once again his Life from the Loam, milling 3 more cards off the top of his library. After resolving that ability, he plays a Blood Crypt from his hand, entering the battlefield untapped at the low cost of 2 points of life, bringing him to 11. He then casts a Calling Ritual, hoping to blow up everything of mana value 2 or less, but Kyle has something to say about that in the form of a miscast. So unless Scott could pay 3, his spell is countered, which it is, and I'm happy. Kyle and I would have lost so much of our board states. Scott passes, and onto J-Man's turn, he mills, draws, and replays his Talon Gates of Madara. Then he just says go over to Kyle. On his end step, he plays Brainstorm, drawing 3 cards, putting 2 of them back. This will trigger his On the Trail, his Emrakul's Messenger, as well as his Joe Rael, getting him another Cat Eldrazi Spawn, and a land tapped onto the battlefield. Then onto Kyle's turn proper, he has to mill a bunch. He then draws for Sylvan Library, triggering all 3 of those things once again. So he gets a tapped island onto the battlefield, he gets another cat token, and another Eldrazi Spawn. Can you believe it? He then upticks his commander, plays an island as his land for turn. He then sinks a bunch of mana and 2 of his Eldrazi Spawns in order to activate Joe Rael's activated ability. Maintaining priority, he channels out a Colossal Sky Turtle, bouncing J-Man's Distinguished Gentleman Poison Dart Frog back to his hand. Then he attacks all 3 of us with creatures that are pumped +33/+33. He lines up his attacks with 2 cats coming at me, for which I declare blocks with a Reckless Fireweaver, as well as crewing up my Racer. 3 attackers went at Scott, knocking him out. Unfortunately, there was nothing he could do about it. And for J-Man, he declares blocks with his Sage. Damage, he activates its ability, bouncing his Gate back to his hand, then using the ability of his Gate, paying 4, in order to phase out a creature, having it enter the battlefield. So he phased out Emrakul's Messenger and chump blocks the bird. Onto my turn, I played Urza's Saga. Then I cast Ether Squall Ancient. I figure, what better way for me not to die than return every creature back to its owner's hand. So I sink 8 whole energy into the Ether Squall Ancient, bouncing all creatures back. With me still being at 40 life, I figured I could get maybe another 2 or 3 turns out of this, although Kyle has an egregious amount of cards in his hand. So all the creatures go away except for my Ether Squall Ancient, but hey, I got a 6/6, so. On J-Man's turn, he plays Urza's Tower, and then he casts Omo, Queen of Vesuva, from his hand, giving it and the Forest and everything counter. He then plays Poison Dart Frog once again, and I mean, I would have too. He's so cute. Then he passes the turn over to Kyle, who draws 3 whole cards thanks to his Sylvan Library, puts 2 of them back, gets a free tapped land. He upticks Tamiyo, shrinking any possible attackers, and bringing her to 7 loyalty. Afterwards, he plays Gemstone Caverns, right on time. He then plays probably his favorite card in Commander, I would wager, the One Ring. So he has protection from everything until next turn and can start drawing a bunch of cards. He plays Standstill, and I'm up next. I need to play spells, so I'm just gonna play spells. On my upkeep, I make some energy thanks to my Ancient. I draw, Urza's Saga triggers, I play an island, and then I recast my commander Satya, Aetherflux Genius. When I do so, Kyle breaks his Standstill. He gets to draw cards as well as J-Man. Must be nice. On the trail triggers, so he gets another tapped island onto his board. I play Anointed Procession, hoping to make a couple of copies of those Ether Squall Ancients and just have some real good defense. However, when I move into combat, he casts Rapid Hybridization on my Ancient, killing it dead. But I do get a Frog Lizard, and because Anointed Procession is out at this point, I get 2 Frog Lizards. I move into combat, attacking into Tamiyo, dropping her down 2 points. Propaganda doesn't care about planeswalkers. Over to J-Man's turn, he replays his Rampant Frogantua, which is a 13/13 at this point. He then plays a Yavimaya Coast while Kyle activates his One Ring in response to his Frogantua. He draws a card and puts a counter on it. Then J-Man plays War Tax, and that could offer some defense if he's worried about creatures. J-Man passes, and on his end step, Kyle cracks into a clue, drawing a card, triggering on the trail, and digging further into his library. Onto his turn proper, he loses a life thanks to the One Ring, draws 3 because of Sylvan Library. This time he decides to keep those cards, so he pays life. He activates the One Ring, drawing 2 more cards, and dropping a Yavimaya Coast thanks to On the Trail. He upticks Tamiyo once again. He then plays a Botanical Sanctum, entering the battlefield tapped. He has an extra turn spell in the form of Temporal Manipulation. So once he's done here, he'll get to untap and do more. Afterwards, he plays Ideas Unbound. drawing 3 cards and then discarding 3. Now, he's supposed to discard at the end of the turn, but he does so now, accidentally. In this case, it does not matter in the least bit. He pitched 3 lands before playing a Mox Amber, and afterwards we see the star of the show hit his battlefield, Laboratory Maniac. And so if he was to draw a card with no cards in his library, he wins the game instead of loses it. He casts Perilous Research afterwards, drawing 2, and then sacrificing his Propaganda, seeing as he's not really worried about it anymore. He plays Words of Wisdom, drawing 2 more cards, and then myself and J-Man get to draw a card, so that's pretty sweet. And after the fact, he moves into his next turn. He loses a bit of life thanks to the 1 ring. Sylvan Library has him draw 3. He'll put 2 back, and then put a Scalding Tarn on the battlefield thanks to On the Trail. He ultimates his Tamiyo, so he'll draw half of his deck, in this case, 3 cards. Then he'll activate the 1 ring, drawing 3 more cards, but in response, J-Man has a Pongify for Laboratory Maniac. Right on time, but sadly, Kyle has a counter spell, because of course he does with 80 some odd cards in his hand. So he counters the Pongify and draws 2 more cards, thanks to 3 steps ahead. Then the 1 ring will resolve, having him draw 3 more cards, of which he only had 1. So this will knock myself and J-Man out of the game, making him the winner. Congratulations, buddy. That was a completely reasonable way to play Laboratory Maniac. And as promised, here's Meatball. He's so chunky. And there you have it, that's the game. We had fun playing this Modern Horizons 3 matchup. Let us know what you thought about the game in the comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, thank you for watching.